Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the session for today with Ascent Realty on the topic how to avoid common real estate deceptions. And I remain your humble host, Benson Okezie-Wosu, Esquire. I'm sure a lot of you haven't seen me in a while on this platform, being Ascent Realty, but then I'm here, so let's get on with it. So, the topic is already self-explanatory. How to avoid common real estate deceptions. Now, why such a simple topic? I think we have reiterated on several sessions on how fraud, on how illegality has now become the order of the day in the real estate sector, both home, being Nigeria, and abroad. So it is always paramount to highlight some of these ways, some of these platforms, or some of these versions of illegalities, some of these versions of deceptions, some of these versions of scams, if I may say, that has or have been persistent in the real estate sector, perpetrated by both individuals and companies alike, and the need to pick them out at the earliest possible time and to avoid them, which is the main reason why we are here today. So let's get on with it. First things first, the number one form of real estate deception. Now, before I move forward, the deceptions I'm going to mention here are in no particular order. Let's get that straight. So there's no survey or any mathematical equation or statistical whatever in terms of the hierarchy of these deceptions. But I'm going to discuss them as I deem fit, at least to the benefit of the viewers, and in line with how they basically operate. So number one is the issue of non-disclosure. Why is this an issue? What is even non-disclosure in the first place? As the name connotes, disclosure simply means making all facts known to all parties involved. Therefore, the opposite, non-disclosure, is the opposite of it. Meaning that now, the non-disclosure comes in two forms. We have the absolute non-disclosure and we have partial disclosure. Now, absolute non-disclosure connotes a situation where all the facts pertaining to the property transaction have been totally falsified. And then the other part, being partial, as the name connotes, simply means that just a part of it has been falsified. So, now, what are these facts that I'm talking about? I'm sure those of us in the real estate business have heard of the term briefs, or at least property details. So each information that make up these property details in every property transaction should be regarded for the purpose of this session as the facts surrounding the property transaction. So where you see things like the size of the property, or rather, let's start from the first one. We see things like the owner of the property, the size of the property, the location of the property, the features, both physical, both patent and latent features of the properties, and so on and so forth. All these fall under the facts. So we have seen situations, even as this session is going, we have seen, and some of us unfortunately have been victims of situations where the details as provided either online or even in written communication or in whatever form turn out to be the exact opposite or partially opposite to what we eventually meet or what we eventually see. For instance, you as a buyer make your intention known to purchase property, but you specifically stated that you need that the property has to be a new building. And of course, we have people who have a fairly used building, but tend to fine-tune it and equate it to be a new building. and God forbid the due diligence you are meant to conduct isn't done, and money exchange hands only for you to get to the site and you see either an old building or a fairly used building. Meanwhile, your specific request was a new building. So that's how this form of real estate deception occurs. It's basically falsifying, it's basically tampering, it's basically adjusting the details of any property, of any brief, to suit your intention, or rather falsifying it to suit the supposed intention of what the buyer is looking for. So that's one. Now, mind you, I'm going to discuss each of these deceptions one after the other and then highlight how they can be avoided. The reason for this is because the ways to avoid them are basically the same. So it wouldn't be orderly to keep repeating the same steps in terms of how to avoid them. So the best approach would be to discuss these deceptions and generally discuss how to avoid them, with special references being made as deemed necessary. So the first one is the issue of non-disclosure. Now, the second form of real estate deception is the issue of title fraud, aka impersonation rather. How does this occur? As the name suggests, we already know what. So title here means title documents. What are the title documents we're talking about? We have the certificate of occupancy, we have the deed of assignment, we have the registered deed of assignment, we have the registered deed of conveyance, and we have the registered deed of transfer. We even have some form of certificate of occupancy called the Global Certificate of Occupancy. We even have the some landed properties covered by the official gazette of the states, as the case may be. Now, how does title fraud occur? Simple. It simply means projecting yourself to be who you are not. Mind you, the first deception, that's the issue of non-disclosure, had to do with falsifying the facts surrounding the property. In this time around, or rather this time around, the facts surrounding the property may be correct, they may be accurate. However, one major detail is missing, and that detail is in terms of who owns the property. I may even mention that most, if not all, these real estate deceptions greatly affect buyers, not even the sellers. Reason being that the buyers are the ones who lose money, because money leaves their pockets, money is removed from their pool of resources to another person, being the most likely the seller, the vendor, as the case may be. So the moment there is an issue in terms of anything at all with regards to the property transaction, the person who is always at the receiving end is the the buyer. So basically, if I may even say that this session is specifically channeled to any potential property buyer. These are deceptions you need to look out for, and you need to nip them at the bud as early as possible. So title fraud, like I was saying, simply connotes presenting yourself as the owner of the property. For instance, my name is Benson Okezewosu, Esquire, like I've said earlier. And however, I come across a property document of, God forbid, my brother, my father, or anybody that I know. And I say, I'm unknown to them, obviously, because no one will know that I'm impersonating them and do nothing about it. So unknown to them, I project myself to being whoever is written on that title document and go around parading it for people who are willing to buy and collect the money from them and execute a supposed deed of assignment. Meanwhile, a fundamental defect in terms of who the title holder is there, and that basically nullifies any transaction that I may have done with the buyer in this case. So that's for title fraud. The next one is the third but the most irritating one, and that is financial deception. Now, how does this work? Financial deception in this case simply connotes paying for a non-existent property, which is worse. We have seen a whole lot of transactions where people are made to pay billions, millions of naira, need I say even dollars, only to find out that the supposed property that they are paid for or are paying for are non-existent, that they are imaginary properties. Now, this may seem ridiculous, but we see them happening every day. Go to the nearest court. Every judge has at least one property matter before him. That's how serious it is. And it will shock you that one of the issues is that the claimant the potential buyer, was made to pay a huge sum of money only to find out that there was never from the onset a property intended for him. Now, you will now wonder why maybe the vendor, in form of a private individual or a company, would be taking money from someone knowing fully well that they do not have the property to, balance with the money that has been paid. These things happen, and it is really sad. So, just to recap them again, the first major deception, the first major real estate deception is the issue of non-disclosure, where, like I have explained, that these are where facts are manipulated. And I explained that for the purpose of this session, fact simply means the details of the property. And number two, we have title fraud, where a person claims to be the owner of the property, of which obviously is false. And then we have number three, the issue of financial deception. Now, how do you avoid these scams, these deceptions? Before I even dwell on that, I need to highlight this. Patience is one virtue that must be observed in any property transaction. Now, this does not mean that that patience guarantees that there wouldn't be any form of deception, in any format. However, being patient keeps you on edge. Being patient keeps you cautious. Being patient keeps you on your toes. And being patient gives room for any, defects that may affect the transaction in the future to at least rear its head from the onset. For instance, let's say you want to purchase a property worth 100 million naira, and you've made a deposit of 40 million, and you put up a sign at that property stating that this property has been sold. Now, the essence of that sign is for you to, now let's say you already put up the sign, you agreed with the seller to put up the sign there while further payments are being made, only for someone else to come up, having seen that sign there, come up and let you know that this property that you are putting a sign on the property that you have not paid for. And you'll be wondering, how is it possible that I have not paid for this property when I've already done a deposit of 40 million naira? And one thing leads to another thing. The person who comes up somehow shows you a greater title over the supposed seller you have been dealing with, and things like that. So, patience gives you all these things I have just highlighted. It keeps you on your toes. So, whenever you are involved in any property transaction, please do not be pressured to close the deal immediately, because anything can happen at any time. That's why people take up real estate companies that have been in the business of real estate transactions, and even private individuals know for a fact that patience is truly a virtue in property transactions, and there's literally no reason or no need at any time. And that is why things like coming up with the mounting a sign after a deposit has been made to see if anybody or any interloper will come from nowhere to claim ownership. These things are done. So, having dealt on that, the number one thing that should be done is to conduct your search. Now, conduction of search, or rather conducting search, can never be overemphasized as far as property transaction is concerned. And we have various places where you conduct the search. You have the search at the lands registry. You have the search at the probate registry. Land at the search registry, to confirm that the documents showcased matches the one registered, and so on and so forth. You have the probate registry if the property is covered by a will, and you have the Corporate Affairs Commission if the property is owned by a company, business name, or any registered entity under the Companies and Allied Matters Act of 2020. You have the courts registry if you see things like this property is not for sale, or you see any caveat emptor sign, or you see any sign basically letting you know that this property has been seized, or things like that. So a search can never be overemphasized in property transaction. And you also have physical inspection, where you basically go straight down to the property to ensure that everything suits your taste. Now, to relate this search to all the issues all the deceptions I have mentioned. Now, for the issue of non-disclosure, if the facts have been made open to you, the best thing to do would be to physically approach the property, obviously with the supposed vendor or agents, as the case may be, to check if the property is at the proper location, if it's the proper plot. Though for you to properly determine a plot, you would need the services of a surveyor to go and pick the coordinates and charts. So things like that. Now, the search at the lands registry would enable you cross-check if the person portraying himself as the owner matches the document at the registry. Even, personally, I don't even see why title fraud is an issue, because if, let's say, the title document is in my name personally on the property, the best thing to do would simply be to ask me for my identification. Or, just basically ask me for things outside that property that has my name and the picture on it to trace together. Now, if I claim that that is my company as well, this is why you, as the intended buyer, need to conduct a CSC search at, using the appropriate portals and channels. Obviously, having confirmed that the name is on the portal, the next thing to do would be to check for the supposed directors, because obviously if I'm claiming to be one of the owners, then definitely my name should be at least as part of the first directors on the CSC portal. So search can never ever be overemphasized. The number two point to note is patience. Like I've said, patience is a very, very big issue. Number three, the issue of raising requisitions. Ask questions. A true owner of a property would always be willing to answer your questions, no matter how much they seem. From experience, it is only those who have very little ties to a property, or no tie at all, or people who don't know what they're doing, that get offended when you ask questions. Because due diligence in property transaction it's so germane that the word due diligence in property, any person who claims to be in the real estate sector and does not understand the term, or at least the description, or at least what due diligence connotes, should just wash his hands out of property transactions and just step aside. Because the term due diligence has been so mentioned that one needs not explain further what is intended by due diligence. So feel free to raise your requisitions the moment you feel that there is any detail, any information that requires clarification. Always raise it. For instance, you claim that you own 3 plots of land, and they send the surveyor to go pick the coordinates, and it's charted, and what we are seeing, what the intended buyer is saying is, let's say, 2 plots or 1 plot even. I mean, nothing stops you from asking questions that how is this matching? You're claiming 3 plots, and what we are saying is 2.5 plots. So there is something fishy, if I may use that term, somewhere, which requires clarifications. And the moment the vendor or agent or whoever becomes dodgy, becomes irritated or agitated, just know that that is the best time to leave the premises. Another thing to notice, to conduct your due diligence, that's basically all I've been saying. Any vendor agent who is unwilling to either provide the documents you need to conduct your search, or at least assist you in the conduction of your search in any form, the moment there is some form of resistance when the request to conduct due diligence is being made, just know that at that point, that transaction should be put to an end. Properties abound. There would always be a property to be bought or sold at any location of the world, except where it does not exist. Let me not talk in an absolute manner, but you get the idea. There is no need to rush. Be calm, be vigilant, take your time, and trust me, you would either not be, it's either you end up having free transactions, or at least you will be vigilant enough to pick out the moment any form of deception is approaching you. Once you do this, I believe to a very large extent, you would have no reason to be a victim of any form of real estate deception, of any form, basically. So that is it for today. Thank you so much. I remain your humble host, Benson Okezie-Wosu, Esquire. Have a lovely day.